David, there's a press release that reads, David Clarkson has explored imaginative relationships to space since the first art he made in the 1970s. I'm kind of curious, since already in the 1970s you were interested in space. I'm kind of interested to know how you got there, and even more precisely, was the question of space one of the things that made you decide to become an artist?
There are two ways to talk about space, I think. In the 1970s, I turned 20 years old in 1976, so it gives you some sense of how old I was. Certainly space in the term of outer space was really on my mind. It's hard to cast your mind back then, but only in the late 60s did humans reach the moon, and throughout my entire childhood there was a great deal of emphasis placed on the Mercury program and the Apollo program. So that was kind of widespread, I think, cultural interest, and I was always really interested in astronauts. So
did you want to be one?
I'm sure I wanted to be a cowboy or an astronaut, or perhaps an artist, or like Andy Warhol, a tap dancer. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But I was. So I sort of grew up, with looking at the NASA photographs and these kind of Walter Cronkite television reports. Now the way that NASA recorded photographically the surface of the moon really left an impression on me. They were these kind of multi-panel black and white images that they collaged up to, like each one creating a larger and larger surface. It had to do with the technology, the camera technology of the time. So when I eventually got to art school in the late 70s, I was interested in painting and drawing, certainly, but I was also interested in exploring photography and using it in the way that I had seen it used so dramatically. So I began to work with photographs in that same kind of manner, by piecing them together and recording kind of flat surfaces, and also topographies of vacant lots instead of vacant moon craters. So there was that aspect of it, and then of course there's the idea of space as a kind of sculptural concern, and I'd also, throughout my childhood had been interested in making things, and was always very excited about painting and drawing, but frequently I know some of my favorite projects were actually kind of sculptural ones, and had to do with kind of 3 dimensions and spatial coordinates. So also I was and remain a giant science fiction aficionado. And many of the stories at that time were set in outer space. And, that remains an interest to me, and I had that interest then. And I think, in fact, that was the reason I came to Toronto, to then OCA, to study art, was because I wanted to learn how to draw comic books more professionally than I had done in Ottawa, and I had a plan. I thought I would learn how to draw them from, find teachers at OCA, and then I would move to New York and work for Marvel Comics. So that's my interest in space. It actually, that may be an unusual press release in that it's somewhat accurate so far. Anyway, I'm not sure which press release is it.
You go on, or at least there is a quote from you. I had been interested in ideas about exploration and images of distant landscapes for a long while. It began simply by trying to picture the particular place where I was. Do you want to expand on that in terms of what an artist can do, or how can an artist pick up on this?
Well, what I was referring to were these photographs of the late 70s. So I would use the camera to record the kind of way that I would use the camera, I would bring it with me, I would go to a vacant lot or a kind of abandoned warehouse or some sort of area of Toronto where no one was. Frequently down near the abandoned rail yards, or there were many factories at that time that were disused, and in New York, where I spent a year in 78, there were blocks and blocks of buildings that were depopulated and left to nature and criminals. So I would search out these areas and bring my camera and then look around, and because that's the kind of environment that I was newly living in. And I would just look and see what was there to see, and instead of framing it according to kind of conventions of camera, I would just kind of look through the camera and click, as I found areas of the site that interest me. And then, without considering too much any sort of final composition or any other expression other than what I was curious to see, and then I would later develop those things and put them together. Now, our eyes work like that. We don't scan continually, in these unblinking pans. We hop from one spot to the other, and then our brains do some work and knit it together like software. So that was the conscious intention was to kind of model that with photographically, and so I did that. I've lost track a little bit of the question, but that's what's come out of my mouth.
Well, I'm kind of interested if we can expand on this question of an artist looking.
Yes.
What can an artist do? Is the sheer looking that you're describing something that an artist can bring to others?
I'm trying to remember if it was Marcel Duchamp or Robert Smithson who said that, I think Smithson, who said that an artist can create just by a glance. And, just by looking at something is, you can create meaning, and you can bring attention to things, and you can learn about the world. So, I think looking and considering, observing, sometimes without value, sometimes, ethically, those are a kind of primary activity that artists, as far as I'm concerned, it's our great pleasure to be able to look at the world and consider it as part of it, but also from a slight difference, slight distance, being able to know that we can affect it by our consideration and the work that we, then present it with.
Mm-hmm. Some would say there's a difference between seeing and looking, and you're suggesting that the artist looks.
Well, seeing sounds more insightful. so perhaps I should use that. I know certainly the Ways of Seeing by John Berger was a book that I was very interested in when it came out. So I'm not certain. I don't. I would have to consider it at some at greater length, I think, to determine which side of the coin I would come down on seeing or looking. But certainly it's the way that I'm considering that kind of visual engagement is a sort of exchange and a kind of way of unraveling things and understanding.
Well, to expand on that thought, that perhaps it's not a diametrically opposed situation. Perhaps, in fact, it's the viewer who needs to see and the artist who looks. But
that's nice. I saw a cartoon the other day. It was two art viewers in front of a painting, and it was they were complaining to each other. I can't believe that this artist would spend years and years studying art to be able to make something that I can't understand in 2 seconds. So,
maybe that's what an artist
is.
Yeah. Well, I want to expand on that, perhaps by excuse me, looking at a recent work of yours.
Sure.
And again, I'm going to use a quote to introduce the work that you were recently showing at Rick Rhodes Projects.
Yes.
I'm just going to read this, and I'd like to hear how you feel about it. Like fantasy or allegory, the caves of these paintings intimate the possibility of experience beyond, behind, beneath the surface of the world. The subverting architecture of portals and tunnels appear to open hidden levels of interconnection, sometimes absurd and humorous, occasionally illuminating or esoteric, to reveal unmonitored regions of desire, fear, and innovation. I'm struck by this question of regions of desire, fear, and innovation, and is that... I'd like to expand on that.
All right. Yes, what did I mean by that? Well, the key is, my key thought about those paintings and about my relationship to painting is that it is an allegorical kind of situation. And then these are areas of exploration. They are kind of, I think of each painting as a kind of topology, a sort of surface, if you will, that we build up mark by mark and erase, and it has a kind of history to it. But it also is a place where we can burrow in a manner of speaking, to our own thoughts. And the further we get into the image, the further I get into the image, allowing myself to kind of enter into it, to explore, I think of it as a sort of space. And these, in the paintings of the caverns, the caves, I'm tracing out a kind of imagery of the labyrinth that's there. And so we'll reach a point where I wonder, well, what is past that portal? What if I went down that path? And well, I decide between those two. That's a sort of sense of desire, I think. Progress through that, exploring further and further down that pathway, that kind of tunnel. And so we talked. What did I wrote? I said desire and
fear and innovation.
Fear and innovation. Tunnel door number 2, perhaps was too inviting, and I was afraid of going down this one. So that is the one that I would pursue. So it's my heart's delight to discover things, new things, and so that's what propels me, in the act of making, And I try to reflect that somewhat self-reflexively in the images of the discovery. So I want to go down this route. That's desire. It sometimes frightens me to see some of these things that I invent and I innovate, and by of course exploring places that I completely make up. But they are also places that I find made for me, because they do mirror to some extent. They are a result of some extent of my own psychology and thoughts.
When you talk about landscapes, we have, of course, right here in the studio, a landscape based on space travel.
Yes, I did a series of Mars paintings, sculptures, and videos throughout the early 2000s.
But you're also referring to the inner space. Caves are, as you say, a kind of allegory for, I expect, the brain or the mind.
Yes, I think memory, yes, some sort of interior life.
And this is where desire and fear inhabit us.
Yes.
So we are the cave, as it were. Or Mars.
I am. Other people are, much less dark. But for me, that metaphor works. I don't know for Plato if it worked, but I got to the idea of the caves through an odd, perhaps odd, circumnavigation. I was interested in, as I mentioned before, I was interested in this kind of modeling, this kind of NASA photographic imagery. Well, I did that in the late 70s and the very early 80s. In the 2000s, I returned to concentrate on the current imagery from outer space. At that time, it was no longer the moon, but was Mars. And what prompted my re-engagement with that was my long time interest in how technology, this McLuhanistic idea of technology as an extension of our senses. So the primary aspect of Mars that engaged me was that it was this brand new landscape, never before experienced or witnessed, that we were now exploring through these technological means. And not only that, but it was conveyed to the public through this new technology of the internet, and widely disseminated. So we had robots there moving around. They're being controlled by, not from Space Command, but by Jim Bell and others in Stephen Squires, professors at Cornell. They were driving around on Mars from Ithaca, New York, and then handing it off to other campuses around the country. So it was amazing to me that that relationship existed, that kind of extension. And every day, these are mobile camera platforms, essentially, mobile cameras, and every day they were taking images and bouncing them back to Earth and being processed very quickly, and all of them being put up and archived on NASA websites. So it was just amazing to me, and it made me think of certain colonial, these kind of expeditions to the West in the United States, where I was living, by Bierstedt and other painters, and but it was somehow a different kind of colonialism, since really we weren't even sure if any microbes were there, let alone displacing any culture. And I mean, is it colonialism if Mars presents a lot of interest, and I realize it presents a lot of interesting ethical and perceptual questions. So the more I just became really engaged with a lot of these issues, and began working with the NASA imagery and learning as much as I could about the technology and the Mars program plans for colonization and so on. So I was moving ahead in a sort of theoretical but also documentary style, where each one of these Mars paintings that I made is based on a particular set of images that was taken by the robots. As I began to get engaged with that, I began to think about how eventually, if people go there, what kind of economy will they have? What are they going to do? And I began to think it through and realized, well, they're not going to go there for oil. They will go, the most important thing to them is going to be like water, because with water you can create both fuel and obviously you can grow plants and drink it, and it sustains life. So where does water exist on Mars? Because I know Mars is very cold. It's going to have to be mined. It'll be found underground, it'll be ice. So I began to think, well, that'll mean there's going to be an ice mine. And then how do you, they'll need automatic robot trucks to take it from the ice mine to the, little bunch of geodesic huts that they have. No, wait, they can't have huts because there's too much cosmic radiation. They'll have to bury the, so eventually I made a whole bunch of architectural models kind of that picked through and described this economy, fantasy economy that I had. Again, though, it was all predicated on my understanding of scientific fact, and I was thinking of it as, although speculative, it's kind of documentary. But I realized, wait a minute, this is a sort of science fiction now that I'm employed. I'm making, and so. And then I saw these images from another satellite that is on Mars. Of course, they've mapped in greater detail the surface of Mars than we have of Earth at the moment. So they found these caves on Mars that are essentially collapsed roofs of lava tubes. The surface falls through to a hollow area, and you get like these black polka dots, which we've seen from space. They look like black polka dots, but actually you're looking into a very large cavern and set of tunnels. And I realized with the Mars imagery, even the kind of regular landscape on the surface, literally the horizon line is the edge of it. It is the edge of human knowledge. No human being really knows what's on the other side of that. No human being has ever seen that before. And I thought, well, these caves are exactly the same thing. Those black holes are a lack of knowledge. That's an interesting place to imagine what's in there. So I thought, since I can't send a robot in, I will use my my vast skills as an artist to determine what's in there. And so I made a series of collages that I thought were caverns of Mars. And then I realized, well, they're caverns of Mars and almost anywhere. And so that was kind of the transition into the new to the project that I'm still involved with, where I just realized that these tunnels on Mars lead back here to tunnels in Toronto. But this is very similar to the way that John Carter of Mars transported to Mars in the stories that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote. He was a cowboy in Arizona who basically fell asleep in a cave, and there was a gas and a haze and a fog, and then he woke up on Mars. That's the technology that was used there. So something like that, I guess, must have occurred to my work.
Maybe you've answered this question already, David, but I'm interested by the fact that, as you were saying, you started off very much involved in photography and using photography to locate a place. And of course, you're more well known now for working as a painter.
Yes.
Do you want to just explore that change or shift?
Oh, yeah. When I was a young artist, there were many artists who I identified with, and who interest me, who at that time, I would say, Michael Snow would be one, eminent artist, and he would sometimes make sculptures. Sometimes he would do photographs. Other times he would be busy making films. And I saw some of his paintings. And I thought, oh man, this is all interesting work. I see the relationship between the film and the Laxing Claire here, the painting in the National Gallery. And I have to say, just a little bit of a sidetrack, I was really, really fortunate to grow up in Ottawa at that time. Bryden Smith was working at the National Gallery. There's so many great shows through the late 60s when I was or early 70s when I was in high school. And I went to the art high school, so we went to the gallery, National Gallery, every Friday. And there was Don Judd retrospective, Dan Flavin, all this Michael Snow stuff, the La Région Centrale. I remember like in in high school going to see that film. Love it, So, so at that time there was kind of ability for artists, I guess because of conceptual art and because of a history of Robert Smithson, another artist I particularly remain interested in, sculptor, filmmaker, draftsman. I love his early collages, So I just modeled myself on those kind of precedents and didn't consider myself I've always considered myself an interdisciplinary artist, a multimedia artist, or this or that, rather than a skilled craftsman I take a more conceptual approach, I think, to whatever activity that I'm working on, and it's not while it responds to its materiality, it's not particularly a kind of craft-based project. I think I lost my train of thought.
I want to pick up on looking at this painting and,
Sure.
and testing your thought that you're not so much interested in the execution of the painting as in the conception, and yet it seems supremely well executed.
Thank you. I made this painting in Wyoming at a residency where I was fortunate to work on it. I don't know how to answer that. It's an odd thing. I really do have a material engagement with the different media that I work with, and it's worked to my disadvantage commercially, I think, in that I've worked, on many unpredictable projects. I certainly have not branded my output with a certain kind of image or one type of way approaching things. It just what I want to discover is many things, not the one thing. Well, this is the hedgehog and the fox. I don't know if you know this word, but I love. I tried to make the work sensual and beautiful and kind of visually interesting, so that it's fun to engage with it, and it gives you pleasure to consider it. And I don't. I guess this is where I do differ from certain conceptualists, who might disdain that kind of, pleasure.
I think Dave Hickey would be on your side.
Well, I don't know if I want him to be, but I think that you're right. He did pioneer that kind of strategy anyway.
You talked about your interest in science fiction, David, and clearly you're certainly informed. And I wonder, does art history in general play any part in your thinking, or is it rather specific artists such as the ones you've mentioned?
Well, I've always been very, very interested in finding out as much as I could about other artists, so I have since my student days just read about them or tried to discover new artists or more about the artists that I'm curious about. And when I travel frequently. If I go to cities, it's to visit new museums, not to go to restaurants. So I can't imagine my practice without thinking about art history. It's like one of the greatest pleasures that we have as artists. Is we can call it work, to go to the Prada or something, Prada or the Guggenheim or any tiny little museum. I love, even the ones out in the middle of the desert in Arizona or something. I mean, and you learn skills. You learn about what art is. You learn what it can provide you. You can see its its magnificence, and it's inspiring, and it also challenges you, and I'm really interested in art history, and I particularly like a fanboy. The artists that I really like, I stalk them. I go to their, see where their old studio was, and they haven't been, stuff like that. So it's a pleasure to me, and it's it's something that I've always enjoyed doing, and I just can't imagine not allowing myself to do that. It is, as a teacher, I have found sometimes with my students, I'm quite surprised that they don't seem to share that kind of pursued interest. But this may have something to do with the internet. I'm not certain where, instead of a kind of chronological history that I have in my mind, they have a kind of a flatter, less hierarchical sense of that information.
Interesting. For many years you worked in New York, with a gallery.
Yes, I worked at Ronald Feldman Gallery for 15 years as the exhibition manager. I lived in New York for about 20 years. And it was a fantastic experience. I loved doing that job. I love the Feldmans are excellent people. And I met, what I did was to work with artists that were showing to help them make the best show that we could make. So I worked with Eleanor Anton, and I worked a lot on a number of large Andy Warhol shows with the Warhol, in conjunction with Warhol Foundation or Warhol Museum, and Liam Golub was an artist that I loved working with. It was a really really wonderful experience. I'm glad that I did.
At that level, art history becomes very personal.
Yes, you're having drinks with people that you've read about, or you're having arguments with these little twerps that 2 years later are having retrospectives and gigantic international careers. So, yes, I remember meeting Damien Hirst and a number of those artists in exactly small little parties with some of the first shows that they did in Gary Hume, some of the first shows that they did in New York in the early 90s. So yes, you're right. And New York is a fantastic place, not only for living art history lessons, but also for walking down the street and then Susan Sarandon will be there, and while you're looking at her, there's Woody Allen, or actually Heath Ledger would be one who. Yeah, it's just like New York is a funny piled on top of each other sort of place, and I think there are plenty of opportunities to do that. I have to say the funniest, could I just say the funniest one? Was I was working not at Feldman Gallery. Prior to that I worked at Howard Greenberg Galleries, one of the world's largest photography galleries, and I was putting, we had a print drawer, much like I have here, and many artists do. I was putting away, I was in the viewing room, no one else was around, perhaps it's at lunch. I was down on the floor, I was putting these prints back into the files where they should be, and right next to me, I saw these, someone walked up, and these boots, these cowboy boots like I'd never seen before. I'm sure they were like built, made out of like lizard and dinosaur skin. They were like exquisite and yet exotic. And in like a cartoon movie, I kind of looked up to see who it was, and it was like Bob Dylan. So I'm like, great, I'm meeting Bob Dylan. I'm on my knees in front of Bob Dylan, and so he was there. He wanted to see. Photographs from the 30s. The work project photographs. Sorry, digression.
Well, perhaps not. I'm interested by what you were just saying in terms of your students having a flat line, as it were, the sense of art history and your own chronological. Is there as they used to say in our art history books, dominant discourse?
Yeah.
Work at work today, or at least a dominant strategic.
Yes, it's the one that says there is no dominant. There is no dominant model, and it also says there is no point to challenging the economic model, and we should all show that we should all aspire to succeed at art fairs. That is the dominant model. It is one that I am not particularly interested in at this point, and for various reasons, in fact. So there's that. There is that as a unifying discourse. It's money and capitalism, I think, and sales and commodity. That, of course, drives an aesthetic, and but because of the speed and information system that we labor under, those styles change, with rapidity, and they come in and out of fashion before you realize that they're there, unless you are like the taste-making cool people who purchase them and now can sell them to you at an advantage to themselves. And I could go on about that, but it's like I think that is that is the kind of academy that we see in place. It's certainly a dominant discourse, and it is a reality. I don't know that it's a inevitable one, but it's I was going to say it's an increasingly popular one, but even that's too negative. It's a popular one.
Well, such a change from, so let us say, the late 1960s, when
Yes.
the market was in fact seen as something to be completely avoided.
Yeah.
And also, maybe this leads to another question around, that wonderful word theory. And I'm thinking of a small booklet which is titled Forget Foucault on one side and Forget Baudrillard on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps we could say Forget Theory. Do you feel that theory, well, let me put it more personally.
Yes.
Does theory play any role in your own thinking, David? Perhaps
Yes.
in this market world we're talking about?
I still pursue theory. I was very interested in French in post-structuralist theory, as many and semiotics and so on, because I grew up in the 80s. Everyone was interested in that. Certainly, continuing to grow up in the 90s. Theory, identity, politics, and theory. Related to colonialism and stuff. That was kind of unavoidable to think about. Good to think about. At this point, I still pursue interesting theory when I can find it. I'm interested in theories of the non-human. I'm interested in theories of materiality and objecthood. However, saying that, I now approach theory as a kind of explanation rather than a demonstration. Instead of reading theory and becoming excited about it and then making a work to fit it, which I never was particularly successful at anyway, I now go ahead and make the work that I would like to do, and when I read and find something that I can misapply to my work, then I have found my theoretical basis. It's so less a basis than a rationalization, I think, or it's a way to communicate certain ideas, perhaps more effectively than I would be able to frame them. So that is my approach now to theory. I have not abandoned it. I just I bring it in at the end. I know, human society. It's much more. There's a much greater unconscious aspects going on here than we. It's frightening to think how much our social activity is actually governed by our unconscious, rather than a kind of a rational thing. We frequently, scientific studies will show that we rationalize like crazy in the absence of information. We make up reasons why we're doing something or why something's occurred or how it's occurred. It's constant. Any neuroscientists will tell you that. So I approach theory sort of the same way. It's a rationalizations that comes kind of post facto.
The canon must be figuring quite largely in your thoughts. Well, maybe quite largely in your thoughts, and obviously being delightful here is your sense of humor and comedy. I'm not suggesting that we find it necessarily in your work, but I wonder if comedy or the nuance of humor plays a role in your thinking about your work.
Oh yeah, I think I have rarely made anything that I didn't find some element of humor in. I make the things that I make. I'm amused to make them, and so like sometimes the things that I think are funny are not. Others may disagree. Certainly, frequently I've seen that effect. But there's humorous aspects in all my work. In the Mars things, I find it humorous that they mimic and refer to church or to Bierstedt or to landscape. I mean, that's to me, it's a joke, you know, that this is Mars and they did that same thing to other you know, terrestrial landscapes. I see that you're not laughing, you know, uproariously at that, but I find it a kind of amusing thing. I find it amusing to make like little cowboy models, you know, that I find it amusing to consider the idea of a windmill on Mars. Although it's perfectly logical, it's also, you know, it refers back to that kind of Western, you know, landscape that we're talking about. So yeah, I think that there's things like that in a lot of the work. A lot of times, you know, when I was younger, I would be more, I don't know if it was ironic or sarcastic. I really don't know. But I look back on some of those things and they're not particularly funny even to me at the moment. So.
I remember a piece, I think it was at S.L. Simpson, it was a flag stuck in my memory,
Yeah.
a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I did a lot of that.
Struck me as
A
funny
lot
at
of
the time.
yeah, a lot of plaster rubble. Those are like monuments that had, you know, they were ridiculous monuments that had already, that I imagined it as a kind of collapse, and they retain, you know, foolish emblems of their self-importance, that kind of thing. It just describing that, I realized that that's a sort of science fiction there. I was sort of imagining some parallel civilization where these were public monuments of famous self-important people and so on. So yeah, those are the works sort of that I was thinking of as kind of things. I thought of those as some, you know, as kind of mocking and ironic and sarcastic, yeah. I did a number of works that were employed these tropes of, you know, 19th century statuary. You know, it's like, you know, they're hardly, you know, contemporary public sculpture, but they were just this, you know, cliche of them, and that I wanted then to use to be able to talk about those. Not so much public space, I guess, but I think just my disdain for, I don't know what you call civilization. I really don't know how, I don't, I don't remember my motivation particularly about those things. But they were funny, and I did also a number of drawings where I went to, and I took photographs of a number of almost every Toronto public sculpture that I could think of, including the Henry Moore and the gates down at CNE and all up and down University Avenue, all these memorial monuments, and I projected them and drew them with oil pastel, but in all a kind of collage way, so that they were like these Frankenstein accumulations of public, you know, memorials.
How do you expect the public to, or how would you like the public to intersect with the work, David? At what level would you hope to see the public
Embrace, right?
embrace
Yeah.
the work?
I don't, I think I would be very satisfied, you know, with situations where I would continue to be able to make my work, continue to show it, not as often as I would like, but a little less frequently, so that I could, you know, it would help me edit, and I would like to, you know, engage in situations of dialogue about the work with interested people. Other than that, that's kind of how I think of the career and the impact that I'd like to have. It's one where I am able to posit things and then hear and then have a dialogue about them to see whether I've posited them relevantly or not. And That's kind of how I think about it.
There's the general public, of course, and then there's very specific publics, professional publics, the critic on one side, the curator on the other side.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about either of those publics in terms of your own work?
Other than they haven't.
Is there a critical establishment these days? Is there a viable curatorial one?
I don't know. You know, those institutions, along with many other cultural apparati that were in operation only a few decades ago, you know, they're all under some. They've been troubled and modified by new delivery systems of information, the internet, and the democratization of that process of where everyone is a critic, everyone is reviewing every restaurant or every art show or every book or everybody's bum, or, you know, I mean, it's unavoidable. So obviously in that cacophony of critical thought, you know, the importance of certain critics now have a niche audience, as they would say. You know, their brand is loyal but small, and so their impact culturally also has been diminished in the same way that, you know, we don't have broadcast television anymore. We have all sorts of niche delivery systems. I would say, so critics, you know, that's, I tried to find ones that I follow, but that's always been the case, you know. It's like there's some that you agree with most of the time, and then others that you love to follow because you disagree with them every single time, and that gives you the opportunity to write, you know, and to rail. But in terms of curators, you know, arguably they are even more important than they were, because it's you know, they are the impresarios of giants, spectacular international spectacular spectacles, and so on. You know, where it's not so much the artist's work, but the putting together of the artist's work, the magnificence of the, you know, the show is the thing. So, but at the same time, you know, in order for those shows to be gigantic, they also have to appeal to larger audiences, and so on and so on. So that is an odd reversal of effect, where, you know, it's inarguable. The audience for museums and art galleries has gotten much larger than it was over the time of my career, and yet you know, frequently the shows are not as targeted. I prefer a smaller show, not a blockbuster show, is all I'm saying. You know? I prefer a younger, smaller band than a giant band. You know, all of those things. You know, there's nothing wrong with you know, work that's not universally popular.
You write about art yourself, David.
Yeah.
What does that hold for you?
Oh, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking through work. I like writing in general. I find it really a pleasurable activity, partly because of its difficulty. But it's, you know, the way that I understand thought is that it is, you know, it's not a thing that just happens in my head. It's a thing that occurs as I speak, and it's a thing that occurs as I write, and a thing often that occurs while I walk or sleep. So that's why I write, is actually kind of find out what I'm going to say.
Which brings me to teaching, and you also teach.
Yeah.
Do you find a relationship between your writing and your practice as an artist and the teaching?
Yeah, it's such a pleasure and such a such a privilege to teach. Unlike your lucky self, I have come to it late in life, where I've only done it for the past 5 years, more or less, and I enjoy it immensely because precisely of the form that rather than, as I'm trying to describe something to my students, it's not like I'm imparting. I impart my experience, but it's also the first time perhaps that I've ordered my experience in a certain way. So I will see, oh yeah, I see that, or I make a connection with that, and that's what I'm thinking. And then they will say, oh, are you, that is so old, so not like, what my mindset is. Mine is like this. And I said, well, that is very true. That's right. I held on to this old value, this old model, and now I have an insight into, how things are working. And I find that a privilege, and it's also, it kicks you along in terms of deadlines and subjects where I have to deliver lectures sometimes on things that I don't know very much about. I have an interest in finding out just because so I have to prepare. As I prepare for those things, I learn more. So I really do find and I like helping people. I like helping people. I like helping them succeed, and I like helping them, find things within themselves that they didn't realize were there. So the whole schmear is great. I really I do dig it a lot.
I want to turn to something perhaps a little bit more personal, which is...
Although I think teachers should not be allowed to teach until they're at least 50 years old, so they've built up a repertoire, but it's fine.
I'll bear that in mind in my reference letter. I want to turn to something a little bit more personal, which is one's own experience being an artist, in a very visceral sense. And realization, of course, I think we all have, that it's not an easy career. In fact, the pressures of constructing and maintaining a career can be immense, and they can be quite destructive for one's relationships and for, in fact, even one's own sense of position. So do you have any thoughts about what it's like to be a career artist?
Well, yeah, I think about it all the time, although in retrospect, I can think of many things that I have given up or missed the opportunity to do because I was so involved with my work. At the same time, you flip it around, and that can bring remorse. It does bring remorse occasionally. You talk about, relationships that have, have not continued, and so on and so on. Those are the things that I'm talking about. But if you flip that around, it is what a privilege and what a wonderful life to have been able to follow, my own interests, my own pursuits, and like every human life, there are experiences and decisions that I made as a younger man, that I wish I could revisit. But there, in general, it's what I had to do because it's what I wanted to do, and it was what I just can't imagine doing anything else, So I know that the few times where there's only a couple of times when I had like a full-time job, and they were brief and few and far between. Why? Because I just got fired, or I couldn't stand it and I walked, because why? It's like, because I wasn't working in my studio, or I wasn't, interested, and so, it's like, it wasn't really ever a choice to be an artist or anything, and what else are you going to do, and it's brought me a lot of pleasure, so I'm happy to have done that, And I never was particularly interested in, for a few years I was interested in like, seeing what it would be like to only make my work and only sell paintings and so on. And I did that for a couple of years, and I look back at the work, it's not my best work. It wasn't entirely my decision. I mean, it did roll for a while, and then it was getting like, now I really now the money is not coming in so easily, I'm gonna have to pursue it some more. And that's like, oh, this is exactly the line that I was worried about. Is the work gonna change now to suit these people that now I'm beholden to, or all sorts of things like that. And I thought, and I always have, and I've done this since throughout my career, is I've primarily worked 2 to 3 days a week in different galleries and working with other artists. And some artists I've spoken to along the way have said they can't imagine doing it, because you're thinking about other artists' work instead of your own work. I find it the opposite, and it's interesting to think about their work because I see how poor it is, or that's why I'm trying to help them make their exhibition so we can edit out these paintings that really, don't need to be. So it's, or the few cases like Leon Golub where it's just, I'm privileged to, I spent in a week setting up with this guy. All we're doing is talking about his work, and it's like, well, what kind of opportunity is that? So, those are the ways that I've looked at it. I never thought of it as a burden. It's always been kind of a fun way to do, and I know that, again, from the few times that wasn't the situation, I know how unhappy I am, when it's not working like that. So that's my thought on career. I think maybe it's bitter grapes, I don't know, but it's like, I think there's something to be said for not being a full-time professional. What is that word? Is amateur? You do it for the love? Something.
Which brings us, perhaps, I love the word love. And I'm a bit cautious about asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When we talk about love, we talk about something real. That's, I think, what we understand when we use the word love, unless we're being ironic.
No.
And I wonder if I can use this term from now, it seems so long ago, the question of the authentic work, or the authentic artist.
Yeah.
Is it possible to transport that concept into today? And most specifically, do you consider that in your own practice at all, David, as a touchstone?
I certainly do. And I know, how to dismantle that idea and that notion. First you call it a notion. I know how to take that apart and how to make it look silly very easily. What is the real? Where is the self? So on. And yet, and I was quite partial to that idea earlier on. Through earlier decades of my work, I was attempting to avoid sort of self-expression or an artist's touch or that kind of thing. And because I didn't think it was that important. But now I have a different appraisal of that idea. I think it's it's one of the few things that interest me in my work, and it's certainly when I look at other people's work, it's what I'm looking for. And I don't care whether critically I can take apart that term. I know it when I see it. I know someone being authentic from someone not being authentic, and tough love for you if you don't see that.